Next from Springfield, Senator Dick Durbin and Ann Callis, the Democrat candidate for Illinois' 13th District, denounced the so-called Paul Ryan Republican budget plan. Later in the press conference, both candidates take questions about their campaigns versus their respective opponents. This runs about 30 minutes.
I'm pleased to be here today with Ann Callis, Democratic candidate for Congress, and we're going to talk today about several programs that are near and dear to millions of Americans and millions of Illinoisans. The first is Social Security. Social Security may be the single most successful and important social program that ever came out of Washington. It finally gave to seniors a guarantee that they would have income after retirement, and they could plan for it. Social Security has worked, and it's worked successfully now for generations, but some politicians can't leave it alone. My opponent, Mr. Oberweis, is an example. He has called for privatizing Social Security. Imagine if you had a privatized Social Security plan the last recession, when most Americans lost a third of the value of their retirement savings. If you happen to be one of those unlucky people at that moment in history, you wouldn't have been able to retire. You'd have seen everything that you'd saved up for and your retirement go right out the window. Secondly, my opponent has called for increasing the Social Security retirement age to age 72. 72. People who are executives for investment firms like Oberweis Securities, or maybe even executives for Oberweis Dairies, they may want to work until they're 75 or beyond, but a lot of people can't do it. It turns out their jobs are physically demanding, and it's extremely difficult for them to continue working. It's another example where Mr. Oberweis is out of touch with ordinary working Americans and the challenges they face in retirement. Now when it comes to Medicare, it's even worse. Both Mr. Davis and Mr. Oberweis support the Ryan budget. Paul Ryan's budget would end the Medicare guarantee. Medicare basically says that once you've reached age of eligibility, you have access to this Medicare health insurance system that has the lowest administrative costs of any health insurance program in America. Americans love this program, and when they're asked about it, they want to keep it. But Mr. Oberweis and Mr. Davis can't leave well enough alone. They want to create a voucher system, and so they want to turn seniors loose to the mercies of health insurance companies. Most people know, and certainly seniors know, that that is not a comfortable or confident position to be in. We believe if you privatized Medicare, you would end up dramatically raising the costs for individuals and limiting access to quality care. Again, Medicare can be improved, it can be strengthened, but to make it a private option is just plain wrong. And finally, they support the Medicaid aspects of the Paul Ryan budget. Medicaid has been expanded dramatically under the Affordable Care Act. Over 400,000 Illinoisans now have their health insurance through Medicaid. They are people who've worked most of their lives, don't make enough money, and don't have the benefits where they work. So now, because their wages are low, they can turn to Medicaid. It means for many of them, for the first time in their lives, they have the protection of health insurance. I'll close by telling the story of Judy. Judy works at a motel down in Marion, Illinois, where we stop regularly. She's the hostess at the breakfast afterwards. Judy's 62 years old. She's a hard-working woman from Southern Illinois and proud of the fact that she's always worked every day of her life. She has never, ever had health insurance one day in her life. But because of the Affordable Care Act, she now has Medicaid protection, and it came just at the right moment because she was diagnosed with diabetes. And if you're facing that and you don't have basic health insurance and a doctor's care, you know terrible things can happen. Well, now she has health insurance. It was a year ago when Ted Cruz shut down the government of the United States of America over the Affordable Care Act. I went on the floor of the Senate and asked him if he'd answer a question. He said he would. And I told him the story of Judy. And I said, what would you tell Judy if you did away with the Affordable Care Act and she couldn't get Medicaid? He said, I'd tell Judy to get a better job. Well, it's a pretty easy thing for Senator Cruz to say, but not so easy for her to say. Struggling with the economy of Southern Illinois and doing everything we've ever expected her to. So when you take a look at the Oberweis approach or the Rodney Davis approach, when it comes to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, there's a clear choice. Ann Callis.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Senator. The Ryan Republican budget is the wrong direction from our country. For Medicare, for instance, it changes from an earned benefit to an earned contribution, putting the burden on our seniors. It also raises the eligibility age to 67, traveling around our district. None of the seniors that I've talked to support this. As a matter of fact, I was in Calhoun County at a pig roast, and a woman came up to me and she grabbed my arm and she said, please do everything you can to protect Medicare and Social Security. And also in our district, and my opponent, Mr. Davis, supports this Ryan budget. But also in our district, we have a lot of students, 9 colleges and universities. The Ryan budget constricts the needs analysis formula for the Pell Grants. Traveling around our district, these students want to strengthen our Pell Grants, not cut them, and it freezes it also. So we need to work together. We need to work across the aisle to get things done for the betterment of the people that we are honored to be elected to and elected by, not support something disastrous like the Ryan budget.
Thanks. Any questions?
Senator, on the other hand, the reality is that these systems, as the trustees' reports say, are non-sustainable. Changes are going to have to be made. They're way out of balance. And so to do nothing, to make no changes, is to have those systems go bankrupt. So what is the Democratic approach?
I agree with you, and here's the way to approach it. We know that untouched, unamended, unchanged, Social Security will make every promised payment for the next 20 years with a cost of living adjustment. And then we know it reaches the need for change. So we should now create a bipartisan approach to this, and the President is open to it, that will come up with small changes today in these entitlement programs, which will play out to buy solvency for years to come. I've supported that. It was similar to what was done with the commission that I served on. And I think that that is an approach to come up with a reasonable way. The Ryan budget is an extreme response, and it's been endorsed by our opponents.
Wouldn't raising, I mean, when Franklin Roosevelt set 65 as the retirement age, the death rate was about 65. Now that it's into the 70s, isn't it logical to raise the benefit, the level at which you start getting benefits?
Here's the difficulty I have. Different people are in different circumstances in life, and to generalize and say everybody keep working includes not only insurance executives and investment executives and even senators and congressmen, but it also includes a lot of people today who are on their feet as waitresses. It includes coal miners. It includes people who are on UPS delivery trucks who work hard every single day. I mean, what I'm saying is let's have a system that is sensitive to the fact that different seniors approach their senior years with different challenges. Physical challenges, for example, medical challenges. And so I want to make sure the system is open to those possibilities. Generalizing, for example, my opponent says, work till you're 72. Come on, tell that to a coal miner.
Can I throw out Senator Dan Biss, the State House Senator, has a proposal that's really kind of a market approach that when you start working, he would require, at least in Illinois, and maybe this would be a good program nationally, to say you have to opt out of a 401k plan rather than opting in. As you know, and just to remind people, Social Security was supposed to be one leg of a three-legged stool. Would that, what's your thoughts about such an approach to say, 401k is better than nothing?
I would. I'm not applying this to our state pension system and its challenges.
Well, I'm asking if you apply his approach now.
I believe, and we do, I believe we should incentivize savings for retirement, but we shouldn't do it at the expense of Social Security's guarantee. Look what's happened over the years. When we had a recession and many retirement plans were devastated, when we had this recession and many companies went bankrupt and said we're walking away from our pension obligations, what were people left with? Social Security. Start there. Make sure that's solid, reliable, then create incentives and opportunities for people to save beyond it. I don't think Dan's wrong. I think the opting out approach on 401ks makes sense to me. But let's not do it at the expense of Social Security.
Senator Durbin, can you clarify as you name all those various occupations? So what, are we looking at like carve-outs or occupation-based or?
No, you can. And I think what we've tried to do with the Simpson-Bowles Commission was to identify the opportunity for some occupations to be able to opt into early retirement because they have to. They physically have to. And medically, they need the support of Medicare. So I think we better be sensitive to that. I'm in a different position in life than someone who's 62 years old, has had a history of heart issues, has a job that involves manual labor, and needs to worry about whether they're going to lose their life savings over the next medical treatment. So, I think that we ought to be sensitive to those realities.
Should means testing be a part of any of these, either Social Security or Medicare?
Well, means testing is in this respect. Most people who are in higher income categories pay more into Social Security for what they receive than those in lower income categories. I don't find anything wrong with that. I think that makes sense. Secondly, what we're finding is the lowest 10% of Social Security recipients are living in poverty. What that means is we've got to help them raise the basic Social Security benefit so that you're never living in poverty if you're living on Social Security. That was the Simpson-Bowles Commission proposal.
You only pay through is it 106,000?
I thought it was 117. I may be off. Is it 117, Bill? Does that sound right?
Should that be raised higher?
I support that. Let me just tell you what we did. In 1983 was the last time we had a Social Security reform, and 117,000 represented 90% of average, 90% earned income. We're now down to like 85%, so we haven't kept up with that. So I would put that on the table, but I would only put it on the table as part of a bipartisan effort for us to put everything together. So you can pick and choose individual things. I've come out publicly for that, but I would just say I'm not going to go any further in terms of the options other than to say I think we ought to have a bipartisan approach to this and try to find some standard that we can follow.
Judge Callis, are you okay with that too?
Yeah, I would put that on the table as a bipartisan approach. But to answer the first question, I think there's ways in a bipartisan way that we can attack waste, fraud, and abuse. And there are some programs that are working. For instance, the U.S. Attorney-driven HEAT Task Force that goes after Medicare fraud. It's brought in and reaped in billions of dollars. So I think if we look at programs that work and strengthen those programs that can recoup some of these losses, bring them back into our economy, I think that's excellent. There is a bill out there, the Government Waste Reduction Act, which would, in a smart way, go after waste, fraud, and abuse. But I think there are opportunities in a bipartisan manner to do this.
Your Honor, you apparently are against the Ryan budget. I'm getting that idea today. What's Speaker Boehner going to say to Congresswoman Callis about that?
Well, I hope he'd be polite and say, hey, let's start working together. Now, in Madison County, when I was chief judge, when I started a program, whether it was creating the first Veterans Court, whenever it was trying to help people in foreclosure and creating a bipartisan commission to do that, and then putting a foreclosure program in place, I didn't care if the person was a Democrat. I didn't care if the person was Republican. I put the best person on those committees to get the job done. So I truly believe that this is the greatest country in the world, and many people may think that it's a naive approach, but I know more can be done for our country.
What makes the next speaker will be amenable, more open-minded maybe than he has been?
Well, I don't know. You'll have to ask him.
Also, your friends at the NRCC, of course, put something out that you oppose the Ryan budget. They say there's a Van Hollen budget, the Democratic alternative. They claim that it would impose $1.8 trillion in new taxes, and are you for that? Because it would more taxes on Illinois families and tax Illinois families into the ground, never balances the budget, et cetera, et cetera.
Look,
Are you familiar with how is that different in Social Security or Medicare? No.
I'm for any approach that would lower and lessen the burden on the middle class, and the Ryan budget is the wrong direction. It gives tax cuts to millionaires to the tune, I think, of about $245,000 a year, transferring that burden to the middle class to about $2,000 to $3,000 a year.
And what is the status of that budget? None of this has passed, right?
No.
Did they even vote on it in the House?
I think they did vote on the Ryan budget.
Is that for the fiscal year that would begin the next October, or this October, the one that's current? Is that what you're talking about?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
And a lot of your commercials have to do critical of Rodney Vegas as compared to saying what you were for. Can you talk about some of the issues as an example? Are you for putting more troops back into Iraq to fight the ISIS? Do you believe that a tax cut, the money actually spurs economic growth, as would be argued? Can you just talk about some of these other issues? Because I think a lot of voters really don't know what you would be for.
Well, the ISIS, I do support the president's airstrikes in ISIS, but I think we do need a multilateral approach there.
What about troops on the ground?
Well, I'll get to that. I do have to separate the personal from the professional on that. And my son is an Army Ranger. He's an infantry officer. He was deployed to Kuwait. His deployment was extended because of the growing security situation in Iraq. He has come home about 2 months ago. I was able to welcome him home. But I think, again, it has to be a multilateral approach. I do know and believe that we have the greatest military force in the world, but I don't believe that we should have boots on the ground unilaterally. But I know Senator Durbin would be able to speak to this because I'm not privy to the security briefings as he is, and it is a rapidly developing situation. It poses an enormous threat to our national security, and I know we have to be on top of that and approach that if he may want to.
The President said no troops on the ground, and I believe him. We tried that. We tried it in Iraq before, and it cost us 4,476 American lives. And I think what we're saying now is the Iraqi army, 900,000 strong, created by the United States, can be trained, equipped, and prepared to fight ISIS. And right now I agree with Ann Callis when it comes to this multilateral force. That's clearly the right first step. Arab and Muslim countries joining the United States to bring stability to their region. This just can't fall on the shoulders of the United States, our soldiers, and our taxpayers alone.
You know, Illinois is looking to raise its minimum wage. There's this ballot initiative, for example, to $10 an hour, same really as President Obama has proposed federally. If that were to happen for the entire nation, does Illinois need to go back and further raise its minimum wage? Should Illinois always be ahead of the rest of other states?
Well, that's a decision, of course, for the General Assembly and the governor. But I think the current minimum wage of $7.25 nationally is dramatically lower than it should be for people to survive working 40 hours a week. The decision of Governor Quinn and the General Assembly to raise it to 8.25 helped, but I think it should go to $10 an hour. Now, there are other side questions that are part of this. Will it be indexed in the future? What happens to tip wage in the future? So you've got a federal standard, and then states need to look at it on an individual basis, and many states see it differently. But as long as we are moving forward, giving people more purchasing and spending power, I think that's going to show dignity or respect for dignity of work, as well as enliven and innovate the economy.
Your Honor, I'm asking about your electability. You're in a tough district, and our friend Pat Quinn may not be a lot of help. He's not all that popular down state. How much of that is a concern to you?
I'm concerned with the people of the 13th Congressional District. And to go to the first question is, I think there's so much a Congresswoman could do to help the people of the 13th Congressional District. Traveling around here, for instance, we have great community colleges that I've been to and great apprenticeship programs. We could really build on those apprenticeship programs, invite our businesses to join with these, with our great local labor force, so our children can graduate from these programs in growing numbers, technologically savvy, skilled, ready to work, and having a great job waiting for them. I mean, as chief, that's what I did. I built coalitions and I got things done. Also, I've learned in a lot of our high schools, our vocational training, voc training's been cut because of funding cuts. Well, again, right there in our high schools, we can invite our businesses, build coalitions, invite labor. Let's try to do a public-private partnership, restoring these vocational training programs again, so our young people can graduate with good jobs waiting for them. So I just think it's an approach that I would have as a hands-on as I did as chief, and really expanding my role as a public servant on the ground, leaving my door open, leaving office, having large office hours. What can we do to move our community further in a positive direction?
You're not going to be able to do any of those things if you don't get a majority of the votes in the district.
Well, that's true.
A lot of those people would be voting for Bruce Browner, maybe one or two for Jim Oberweis. And then a lot of them for you. You're going to need a lot of Browner voters as well as good voters.
Well, all I can do is, and when I got in this race, I knew that how difficult this would be. I mean, I had just won a circuit judge a term of 6 years in 12, and I resigned that and gave that up to commit myself to public service. And in a further manner. And I don't regret it for a moment. And I think as long as I get out and work my tail off, which I've been doing and meeting 12 to 14-hour days, meeting as many people as I can, then hopefully it will come in my favor. And that's all I can do. I know this, that I knew if I spoke from the heart and I got in this for the right reasons, I can sleep at night.
Just to clarify on the earlier point on the alternative Democratic budget, I think what you said is you're not fully in support of that.
No, I'd have to look at everything and on the table, and let's see what's practical and let's see what we can get done.
Okay, and a thought, I know we've been over this, DCCC, or you were, not running the week-long of ads in St. Louis. Is that an indication of a problem? Or any of the poll numbers, are they an indication of a problem in where this race is?
I don't think there's any indication of a problem that I see on the ground. And I am an independent person. I had made court reforms in Madison County court system, got on the wrong side of my party by doing that. I speak my mind. My number one goal would be to serve the people of the 13th Congressional District in the best way I know how.
And on Medicare, I think we talked about one possible change in Social Security, with the bipartisan agreement
right.
to maybe raise the limit at which you pay on your income. What direction do we go to save the Medicare system?
Well, as I had said, I think that we have programs in place that we can strengthen and go after waste, fraud, and abuse to strengthen our Medicare. And I think there are programs that actually work, as I said, the HEAT task force.
And I might
Yes,
mention,
Senator, do you agree with that?
well, I would just tell you that we know there is fraud in Medicare and Medicaid. There's no excuse for it. And there are ways to police it, and we should. Even something as basic as publishing what hospitals are charging under Medicare and Medicaid. So there's more transparency.
Is that being done yet?
No, it's just started, The other thing I would add to you, and I mentioned earlier when we got together, we have seen a slight decline in the increased costs of health care. Each time that decline starts, it lengthens the solvency and longevity of the Medicare system and Medicaid as well. So as long as we're moving in the right direction in this country with health care reform that brings down the cost of service and doesn't compromise quality, it's going to build more longevity into these programs.
Do you agree with Judge Callis, Senator, that just going after the waste and fraud and this other stuff you talked about is enough, or is there another step that has to be taken?
There'll be other things that are part of it, but, well, we see, you want us to give all the things we would put on the table in a bipartisan session. And what I think her position is one I share. We need to finally get the Republicans who never stop speaking about entitlement programs to sit down at a table with the president, with the Democrats in Congress, and work out a bipartisan approach to this. It's fallen apart in the past because the president and others have said we need to include tax code reform in it as well. And they've said if you're going to touch the tax code, we have to leave. And that's what stopped us from having meaningful bipartisan efforts to reform our entitlements.
Senator, why shouldn't, though, the president be criticized? Bill Clinton had the Kerry Danforth Commission on Entitlement Reform back in 1995 or so. Barack Obama, the entitlement situation is getting worse. He ignored the Simpson Bowles, never acted on it. He's not done anything to really say, let's get together and have a...
You're wrong, and so let me clarify it. When the president inherited the presidency from George W. Bush, his first year's budget was $1.2 trillion in the red. We have reduced that deficit by 60% under this president by making spending cuts and revenue increases. But that whole section in terms of entitlements requires a bipartisan approach. Speaker Boehner has to be willing to sit down at the table. They've been unwilling to do that because they don't want to discuss any parts of the tax code. So you can't blame the president for this. I think that goes too far. He has kept his door open. He has opened the possibility to change entitlements in a positive way to guarantee their future. But to argue that this is at his doorstep, he's made progress on a bipartisan basis to bring down the deficit. The next piece on entitlements requires another bipartisan commitment.
And can I ask, as a judge, we're looking across the nation and making changes. Actually, Illinois is looking to rewrite its criminal laws. One of the things that Mayor Emanuel just said is we're clogging the courts and we ought to decriminalize marijuana. What are your thoughts on that specifically, and any other changes that you might endorse as far as making the legal system more cost-effective and more fair?
Well, I was a felony judge for 7 years, trial judge, so I wouldn't be for decriminalizing marijuana. But this is what I would be for, and I was a statewide leader on this type of restorative justice. Having created the first Veterans Court in the state of Illinois, we started that very rudimentarily, no taxpayer dollars. That court has grown now to be a model for our nation. Hundreds and hundreds of veterans have gone through that program very successfully, and they don't reoffend. So I would be a great advocate for those types of problem-solving courts that do lower costs, because these people that graduate, it's difficult to graduate from these problem-solving courts like drug court, like mental health court. But I see a great role that I could be as a congresswoman to be able to be not only help strengthen these programs throughout the district and hopefully our nation, but also be a bridge to these communities in our district, community programs that I've traveled around our district and gone to them, and they try to help people coming off probation, coming off parole. I think I can strengthen and be a bridge to these types of programs and our criminal justice system. But I think I have lived it, I have worked it, and I know that these types of restorative justice programs work. And they're not giving anybody a free pass. They're difficult to go through to graduate from these programs. But as chief judge, I attended many drug court graduations, and as every family, I think, has suffered from a family member going through drug addiction or alcohol addiction. And to see these graduations, I think every citizen should come to these graduations, because it not only affects that person, but that graduates from these courts successfully, but the entire family, and the relief on the family's faces, and what they have gone through and struggled. So I would be a great advocate for these types of programs, and I think they absolutely reduce costs.
But as Illinois goes forward with medical marijuana and allowing patients to be able to do that, we're basically bucking federal law. Is there changes that need to be made at the national level?
Listen.
Both of you.
So we have two states, Colorado and Washington, that are basically experimenting with medical marijuana and beyond. And that brings a whole challenge to a body of federal law in terms of depositing money in banks and other activities. And we have to resolve that. We're at the earliest stages of this. They talk about states being laboratories, and that's what we're seeing in Colorado and Washington. Let's see what happens on the ground there. I've supported medical marijuana in the past. I've supported being realistic, as Judge Callis has, when it comes to sentencing. As a practicing lawyer, as congressman and senator, I've seen these families with 17-year-olds, heartbroken, coming in saying, I think my son just ruined his life. You get caught with the joint. So, we've got to have a more thoughtful, sensitive approach to it. Now, there are some who want to say, now let's open the doors. Let's treat marijuana like chewing gum. And, I'm not there yet. In terms of my thinking, I want to watch this and monitor it. I want to make sure that we are not inviting other addictions as a part of this. I want to make sure that our laws are thoughtful in terms of what we do as it affects families and young people in their futures. So we can learn from these two states, and I think the federal government is currently going through that learning process.
Senator, you're at an event today, if I might change the subject, regarding women's economic stability.
Yes.
Well, what are the problems, and what's the impetus for this?
Well, the problems we face are obvious. Currently in America, we have not passed the Pay Equity Act, which says that women and men should be treated fairly when it comes to the wages they're paid. It gives them a recourse in terms of learning what others are making, a recourse in terms of appealing their cases in a timely fashion. I think that's part of it. Secondly, we have women as a group that are paid lower wages overall than men for many of the same occupations. All of these things, I think, can be resolved, and we've had no support, little or no support from the other side of the aisle to resolve them. So that is part of it. I've challenged, since I make a complete disclosure of all my employees in all my offices, I've challenged Mr. Oberweis to tell us the basics of people who work for Oberweis Dairies and Oberweis Securities. He's refused. What we see in public information is that there are precious few women even considered for positions of leadership.
Well, this event in Peoria isn't about Jim Oberweis, though, is it? Are you going to Peoria today?
I'm going to Peoria with Sherry Bustos.
Yeah, isn't it about women's economic stability?
It's about pay equity.
Pay equity?
Yes, and it will involve him.
Oh, okay.
Everything involves him.
So I'd forgotten about that. Who might be involved besides her, and helping to find some solutions?
I don't know, but you may have to come up and find out. All right? Yeah, well,
Senator, would you be for, or Ann, look, I don't know what the actual numbers are. I never heard good numbers on how many people are getting minimum wage or actually head of households. Would you be for saying, look, we can boost it for those who can demonstrate they are the head of household, but for those kids like my sons and any number of others who work at some part-time job in high school just to have money for a date on Saturday night, we're putting a lot of these small businesses, are barely making it now, and they can't just raise their price of their pizza to necessarily incur a lot more cost. Would you be for a bifurcated plan to say, okay, we'll do something for heads of household, but otherwise, aren't these job training programs when some kids work?
listen, it is very difficult to do this because you're dealing with some kids who are trying to get money for gas and the date on Saturday night, and others that are literally working for gasoline so they can go to the community college and take their courses. There are struggling college students who need this money as desperately as anyone because of the student debts that they're facing. So to say young people, I'm sorry, you're going to get stuck at a sub-minimum wage, you can't do that. It is better for us to establish, as we have throughout history, a basic minimum wage that applies to young people working their way through college, that applies to single moms trying to raise babies, and returning veterans. All these folks, they need work too. And when you start parsing it out and saying, well, we'll let the people who dip ice cream cones be paid a little less, I just think that's plain wrong. Let's have a basic minimum wage. Let's come about it honestly. Let's raise it in a thoughtful way and index it in the future so that businesses can accommodate it. And remember, 99% of those dollars go right back into the economy, creating more demand for more goods and services, more profits, more jobs. Okay? Thanks, everybody.
With all that, including indexing in the future?
I do, and 6 out of the 10, remember, 6 out of the 10 minimum wage earners in the state of Illinois are women. Many of them heads of households. Traveling around our district, women, and going to community centers, women are literally, and heads of households, men too, choosing between food and diapers. So it's time we raise the minimum wage.
Thanks, everybody. See you in Peoria.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.